Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we are the
Just
Formula One Bros.
just two twins with a love of F1 to bring our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And for this episode, we are going to be reviewing the Bahrain Grand Prix, everything that happened. And we're recording this on Monday. And before we get going, it's race week again. We will be racing in Saudi Arabia in 6 days' time. Very excited about that. But
Oh, yes.
Getting on to the Bahrain Grand Prix, it ended with the first Ferrari 1-2, and it ended with a Ferrari 1-2, and it is the first victory in 910 days and 45 races, ending one of the longest winless droughts in the team's history. And it was followed closely behind by the two Mercedes drivers of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, and Kevin Magnussen putting his Haas up into P5. So lots to get to right from the get-go, right at the start. Everybody got a really good start, and right away the top four remained as they were. It was coming out of the first corner. It was Leclerc, followed by Verstappen, followed by Sainz, and followed by Perez. And that's the way that it stayed up until the last couple laps, which we'll get to. First major thing that happened that I noticed at the start is Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah. He got off to a rough start.
Really rough start. He was sitting P6, and by the end of the first couple corners, he was down in P14. But he worked his way back up into the points in the end. So it was all in all a great drive from Valtteri Bottas. Great. I imagine that you probably share a very similar sentiment, but great racing all the way up and down the field from top to bottom. The only incident that we had, fortunately, as when it comes to contact between drivers, was Esteban Ocon and Mick Schumacher, which resulted in a 5-second time penalty for Esteban Ocon.
Yeah, and I just want to say something real quick about the racing, because right from the get-go all the way throughout, it was very clear that the new regulations that were put in place, the whole reason for these newly designed cars were to promote better racing and to make sure that the pack was a lot closer, and that the cars were easier to race against each other, easier to follow, all that kind of stuff. And so far they've proved to do exactly that. We got some incredible battles, got some incredible laps, really close racing, and it was very entertaining to watch. So the new regulations have seemed so far to be doing exactly what they had planned on.
Yep. And continuing on, Lewis Hamilton was the first to pit, first of the leaders to pit on lap 11, which brought out a really interesting tire strategy from the Mercedes. Before we get into that, just a reminder of the rule change. We talked about this when we were going over the sporting regulation changes, that there's no more Q2 tire rule at the start. So the top 10 does not have to start on the tires that they use in Q2. So it gives the entire field free choice of tire. And when we get to McLaren, that's going to be important. But Lewis Hamilton was the first. Everybody aside from McLaren started on the softs. Lewis Hamilton was the first to come in and pitted for the hards, and both him and George Russell pitted for hard tires, which it seemed like the strategy was going to be, soft, medium, soft, or soft, soft, medium, some combination of two soft tires, two soft stints and a medium stint, slapped on the hard tires, and really, really early and struggled to get them into window. And then, oh my God, my cats are, told y'all, eventually it'll happen. World War III. So, and then they were the first to kind of pit, and then we started seeing more pit stops. And I think the theme when it comes to tires, the theme was really high tire degradation, which we knew was going to be a problem at Bahrain because it's a really abrasive circuit.
And with the new tires
being,
and with the new tires, with being bigger, they definitely plan on it's very easy to overheat the tires. With the new 18-inch rim tires. My what was interesting to see was even with the new Q2 tire rule that you can start the race on whatever tire that you wanted. There were a lot of drivers that started on the tires from Q2, even though they didn't have to. And like, for example, Max Verstappen started on used soft tires while Charles started on new soft tires. So it was really weird. I'm wondering why. Still in my brain, I'm kind of wondering why that was the case.
So
even though they kind of have.
Hold
on. Well, even though they kind of you can start on any tire that you want, essentially.
So the reason why that was is because it comes down to tire allocation for the weekend.
Okay.
And some teams had an extra set of soft tires, and the people that started on used tires, like Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Sergio Perez started on fresh softs, moved over to scrubbed tires. And just it comes down to tire allocation and how many had different sets, because the more you advance through qualifying, the more sets of soft tires you use. So a lot of people towards the back of the grid, qualifying at the back of the grid, had an extra set. And there were some drivers, if they did more testing or used an extra set through testing, didn't, that qualified in the top 10 didn't have an extra set. So that's kind of what that was. So kind of moving on throughout the race, lots of different, it kind of looked like it was steady, lots of really good battles going on all up and down the field. And before we get to the Charles and Max battle right up at the front, which was just absolutely amazing.
Gosh, that was awesome.
There seemed to be, because teams were still kind of getting their heads wrapped around all of the degradation. So there was a lot of differing strategies, lots of pit stops happening. And it really kind of threw a wrench into a lot of different things. We saw a lot of drivers coming and going in fashions very similar to what we would associate with like NASCAR or IndyCar. You pit on, you get, a really good set of tires, and then you make a lot of ground, and then you put on a different compound, and maybe you're not as good compared to others on that tire compound. So lots of coming and going, lots of great overtaking. So starting on lap 17, Max Verstappen pitted 2 laps prior to Charles Leclerc. So Charles Leclerc Verstappen pitted, did an out lap, did a full lap, and then Charles Leclerc pitted. So kind of on this tire deg thing, the undercut was very, very powerful. And for those that don't know what an undercut is, when your entire strategy, it's essentially you pit early to have fresher tires to make up more ground, and you are quicker than the driver that in front of you that has not pitted. So it's a way to overtake through the pit stops. And Max Verstappen gained 3 seconds on the undercut. It was very, very powerful. And they came out on lap 17 when Charles pitted right next to each other. And that gave us 3 laps of great racing.
Oh man. And I tell you, that battle, that was, oh gosh, that was so cool to see. And also Charles, really freaking smart with his racing. He was purposely braking early and allowing Max to pass him so Charles could pick up DRS at the next straightaway. And so he knew that he would have better traction than the Red Bull coming out of turn 2 and 3, going into that straightaway, activating the DRS and being able to pass him. So Charles was literally, I do that kind of stuff, like playing the Formula 1 2021 all the time. But like for that to actually happen in a race, like with actual Formula 1 drivers doing that, That's freaking awesome to see.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Charles, hats off to you, bud. That was genius. And it worked because then he was able to get out of DRS range from the Red Bull and just sailed off into the distance.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
was really freaking smart on Charles's
If,
part.
and I think I tweeted this on our Twitter page, but if that is a preview of this year's championship battle, sign me up.
Oh my gosh.
It was incredible.
The best part about that is, and we'll talk about the racing officiating later, but it was clean.
Yep.
It was so clean. I know last year, anytime really like after Silverstone last year, anytime Max and Lewis got near each other, we were like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Someone's going to get taken out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was super clean. And that's what made it so awesome to watch. And I really enjoyed after, especially Max came up and like in an interview, Max came up to Charles and was like talking to him, and they were like talking back and forth. And they also shared in the fact that that was a lot of fun. And even though it ended poorly in Max's, ended poorly for Max, the whole race did. But it was really, really cool to see from start to finish that whole thing transpire. It was clean. It was good racing. And that's what it's freaking about. And if we get that all season long, we are in for a treat.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, it was only 3 laps, and it took Max Verstappen locking up and flat spotting his front. I believe it was his front right tire, one of his front tires, and it took him flat spotting and having to recover all of that for Charles to be able to pull away and into the distance. And at that point, they were both sort of managing, kind of on that, Max Verstappen really having to manage his race. After that, there were several factors that played into his DNF, which didn't come until after Pierre Gasly's DNF, which brought out the safety car.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of want to touch on all 3 of those because they're all Red Bull powertrain cars. And I just kind of want to talk about that because, so Pierre Gasly, we know he retired because I believe it was a hydraulic issue. It was, or it was, no, it was an MGUK. It was an MGUK failure. It was something electrical. And that's why the car caught on fire as dramatically as it did. It was an electrical fire. And that's why it took a little bit longer for the marshals to get to that car and clear it, is because it was still live, it's a huge electrical system that is going through all of these cars, and it was still live by the time they were able to put out the fire. And I believe, coming from the Red Bull and the Honda camp, that is unrelated to the problems that Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez had. Max Verstappen had a litany of problems. It was hard for him to really get close to Charles for more than a couple laps because he was suffering with brake cooling issues. Both him and Perez were suffering with brake cooling issues throughout the race. And because of that, he was having to really put a lot of stress on the tires. And that's why I think that's why he locked up in the battle and just kind of had to, with Charles, and just kind of had to resort to managing his race a little bit.
Yeah.
But so he had that problem. And then as we got closer to the safety car, under safety car conditions, and after the safety car, he started having a lot of power steering issues. So it was the faster that he went, the harder it was for the car to turn. And that made his defense at the restart. He had to defend really hard against Carlos because the Ferrari's got a really good restart. Max kind of miffed it, a little bit. And so that was what made it really hard for him to defend. So Pierre Gasly brings out the safety car with 11 laps to go, takes a little bit while to cover it up or to get it cleared up. And they go racing with, I think there were 7 racing laps left to go, 5 laps to go, or actually it was probably closer to 3 laps to go. Max retired. The engine cut off. And
it was like coming out of the final corner. It just
Yep. It just
cut out.
completely cut off. And fortunately he was able to get it to coast back into pit lane. So there was no safety car, nothing. And then on the final lap, the same problem happened with Sergio Perez, but it came coming out of the first corner.
Yeah.
And
turned his car around.
Yeah. Well, it's because the engine cut off and it locked his rear axle. So do you remember in the Spanish Grand Prix where that happened I guess it was 2020 when that happened to Charles?
Yep.
He was going through the final chicane and then just all of a sudden spun when it was kind of the same thing there.
Yeah.
And we found out after the race that both of those cars, it was a fuel pump problem.
It was the same issue.
Yeah, it was the same issue on both cars. Fortunately, unrelated from what happened to Pierre Gasly. And that was purely just a technical malfunction. We also do know that the steering problem that Max had was one of the track bars on the front suspension got bumped loose into a different geometry setting. So it completely changed the geometry steering of his car, which is why it was hard for him to turn, especially at high speeds. And that was just from it got bumped when they let him off the jack from a pit stop.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. So all of that happened. It was a very dramatic last couple laps, but it resulted in Mercedes being third and fourth, and Kevin Magnussen ended up being in fifth. And
which I'm regardless of the two Red Bulls retiring and, kind of by luck, Kevin got up to fifth. It was so cool to see him up in fifth place.
It was good.
Oh my gosh.
And fun fact about Kevin Magnussen's finishing position, Haas now has more constructors points than they did in the 2020 and 2021 seasons combined.
Yep.
Because they got
2 hours.
They got, I think it was like in 2020, it was like they scored 3 points, I think.
Yes, because it was one time, and it was actually Kevin Magnussen finished ninth place in Hungary.
Yep. So they got 3 points that whole season, and then no points, and now they have 10.
Yeah.
So more
in
points
2 hours, in 2 hours they got more points than the last 2 years, which is incredible. I think if they're I saw this on Twitter, and I can't remember who posted it or what, but I totally agree with it. What Haas has been able to do from last season to this season is what every single team aspires to do.
Yep.
And they've done it.
Yep. Yeah.
Granted, it's only the first race, but like, what a way to start the season.
Yeah. And we'll get on to Haas in a little bit when we go into what our next thing is. So just overall, I guess, I'll go and then I want to get your impressions. Just overall weekend impression from the race. For me, it was a really, really good reset from everything that happened last year. A completely reshuffled pecking order, Mercedes a little bit out of position, so it's and Ferrari has made good on their promise so far, it seems like. Mercedes seems to be a little bit on the back foot right now. So it's kind of shuffled things around. It's created a different look at everything. And it was such a refreshing reset from all of the controversy that happened last year on the part of everything. So there's better racing. The race officiating was better. There was no controversy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. There was, we had no idea what to expect going into that race.
Yeah.
And I left feeling very pleasantly surprised. And just
absolutely.
in a good mood and very much looking forward to the rest of the season, because I think it's going to be great.
Yeah. I share very similar sentiments. I absolutely left that race, and not just because Ferrari got a 1-2. I mean, you can very easily see the Ferrari flag behind me, but not just the fact that Ferrari got a 1-2, which I'm elated about that. Which there's a cool reaction video on our TikTok. So go follow our TikTok page if you want to go see that. It's quite fun. But overall, just everything that happened in that race, I feel satisfied from it. Like it was it wasn't a terribly exciting race. Like it wasn't like from start to finish, like, you know, it wasn't like the 2019 German Grand Prix or 2020 Monza, or, you know, it wasn't anything crazy like that, but it was a good race. And, you know, from top to bottom. And that's not what we saw a lot last year. Granted, it was an awesome season, and it was definitely very dramatic all from start all the way to finish, but not necessarily in the best ways. And it just felt, and you're exactly right, it felt like a fresh reset. The new regulations have completely shuffled the pecking order, and it's such a nice refreshing start. It was great. And one last thing I want to point out, because I don't want to mention this too much because we'll talk about Ferrari. Ferrari got a 1-2. Very excited about that. The last time a Ferrari got a 1-2 finish in the opening race of the season, they won the championship. Every single time that they have done that, 7 times in Formula One, in Ferrari's history in Formula One, they got 1-2 finish at the first race of the season. They went on to win the championship all 7 times. And we got a 1-2 finish in Bahrain. So who knows?
Yeah.
Ferrari winning the championship 2022 confirmed.
I think, oh God, I wish. I think it's so much harder to say though, because we have such a long season ahead of us. But that's going to make it all the more exciting. And I think that race for me, it ticked all of the boxes. It wasn't an all-time classic, but it was good. And it set a really high bar for the rest of the races for the season. I'm especially excited to see what happens at tracks where it's harder to overtake, like Imola, Monaco, Hungary, Jeddah next week,
next week in Jeddah.
So I'm just very curious. Before we get on to our weekend top 10, just a bit of news that came out on Saturday before qualifying. The FIA released their report on the investigation into Abu Dhabi. So,
oh my God, it's just so nice to put this behind everyone.
I want to touch on it a little bit. Again, it's good to put it behind us. And it's especially good to put it behind us because one of the first points that stuck out to me was the race results are final and will not be amended. Doesn't matter what happened, it will not be amended. And it was on that premises as to why the Mercedes protest was thrown out. Didn't even get seen by the FIA, by Formula One, the World Motorsport Council, nothing. The results were never going to change. And I've said this on Twitter a couple times. And this has just in general been my opinion. Even if the results did change, Max would still win the championship on countback because he had the most wins. So even if they scrapped Abu Dhabi and said, that was a mistake, Max would still win the championship.
He had the most wins.
So a couple other things. They said that the result of the controversy was human error. And which yes. It was human error. Like Michael Massey, I think unfortunately that is a really scathing indictment of not just Michael Massey, but the race direction in general that season.
And it was the entire season.
Yes. And we talked about this before, but I think it even went back further than that season. I think it went all the way back to 2019. Anyway. So the resulting human error came from several factors. Undue pressure, from all sides, on Michael Massey. Michael Massey and they particularly cited the direct lines of communication from team to race director that put undue pressure on Michael Massey, and he hesitated. He made the wrong decision. He made a mistake. I think, and this is just, I don't know what went on in the race director room. I don't know. I think the original mistake was not letting lapped cars by. I think that was the mistake.
That was the mistake.
So everything that comes after the only letting a few cars by and on the same lap letting the safety car come in, he was righting his wrong and did it in an incorrect way.
Yeah.
So
two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly. He was trying to correct a wrong in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as he made that decision, he should have either stuck with it or, it should have just, if he said lap cars should have gone by, it should have ended under safety car.
Yeah.
So that is the natural progression of things. And he did that incorrectly.
Yeah.
So all of that, they also said that came from ambiguity between the two, two points of the regulations in there. I can't remember what articles they are specifically, like the number, but it's the article that says, I think it's 41.12, which says any lapped cars can overtake the safety car, are required to overtake the safety car when, it's safe to do so. Mm-hmm. And so they have changed it to be all.
Good. Yeah.
All lapped drivers are required to overtake the safety car when safe to do so before the safety car comes in.
Yeah.
And it's required that happens.
And that's a good thing that they made that distinction, because having been on committees with writing bylaws and different things for organizations, if you want to try to eliminate any vagueness whatsoever and just small, minute changes to the language like that, going from any to all, any lap cars suggests not all of the lap cars.
You can pick and choose.
Change it. Yeah, exactly. You can pick and choose. Like, for example, the 6 cars that were in between Max and Lewis. But now that it's all lap cars have to, and we saw that in the race on Sunday in Bahrain. Yeah, we saw that, and it was great to see that carried out correctly.
So it was the 41.12 that was like any lapped cars, and then 41.13 that said the race director has overarching authority on all things safety car matters. That's massively paraphrasing, but
yeah,
it was the ambiguity between that, pressure from all sides on Michael Massey, resulting in human error in a championship result that will not be changed.
Yeah.
The last thing that I want to say on this because we have to move on. I've said this before and it bears repeating because I see it. I see it on Twitter all the time by people that tweet things, by people that reply to certain tweets that, Lewis Hamilton is an 8-time world champion, or Max Verstappen somehow is forever going to be known as the human error world champion. So I'm going to respond to both of those points. One, Lewis is not the world champion. He's still a 7-time world champion. He's still one of the greatest, if not the greatest, to ever grace the sport of Formula One. He is, it's like how people say Taylor Swift is the music industry. Lewis Hamilton is Formula One.
Yeah.
Like, there's no getting around that. And he didn't win the championship, and that's okay. He's not an 8-time world champion.
No.
Max Verstappen is. Then I want to respond to the second point, which is it's the human error world champion. Well, you could say that about Lewis Hamilton.
You can probably... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you could say that about Lewis Hamilton because had the Toyotas put on wet tires instead of keeping them out on slicks, Timo Glock would have not been slow. And Lewis would have not made it up to 5th position.
And Felipe Massa would be the
2008 world champion. It's
you can cite a point in any season, every single Formula One season. You can cite a point where the championship came down to a driver, a team, an officiating call, something to human error.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Any single champion, even like Michael Schumacher, childhood hero, his first world champion when he crashed with, I believe it was Damon Hill. When he ran, there's a lot of conspiracies that Michael did that on purpose to take Damon Hill out. Human error. Senna Prost going into the first turn in Japan. Human error.
It wasn't really an error, though. It was an error, but it wasn't an
error.
It
was an error. But my point being, you can cite any Formula One season that it came down to human errors, one human error or multiple human errors. So to say that Max Verstappen is the human error world champion, great. He's right along next to every single world champion that there's ever been in Formula One.
Yep. And I hold this belief as a musician in that if you want to be the best, you have to work the hardest. You have to be the best on the day of, any audition that you take, concert, any performance that you're doing, anything that you're doing. If you want to be the best, you have to show up and you have to be the best. Mm-hmm. And you have to take advantages of the opportunities that are provided to you. And I've always said that it doesn't matter how crazy a result of a Formula One race with, like, I'm going to cite Esteban Ocon winning in Austria or in Hungary, Pierre Gasly winning in Monza. It doesn't matter how crazy the result is. You have to be good enough to capitalize on the misfortune of others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Max and Red Bull did. Max has nothing to do with Michael Massey's decision. The decision was made by Michael Massey. Red Bull pitted Max for soft tires. Lewis didn't pit, or Mercedes didn't pit Lewis for soft tires.
Yeah, which really, if you want to blame someone, you could also blame Mercedes for not pitting Lewis too.
Yeah. So it's things are, and it's also a championship that was won over the course of a season.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Abu Dhabi. It's Azerbaijan. It's Brazil. It's France, Austria, Spielberg when Max sweat the triple header. It's the United States when Max defended Lewis, who was charging back. It's Bahrain when Max had to give the position back. Mm-hmm. All of these little things created the situation that came to be in Abu Dhabi. And every situation that you're dealt, you have to capitalize on what you have. And it just so happened that Max came out on top. Yeah. And I'm not saying this to downplay Lewis or, to be on Lewis's case. He did the same thing too. In Brazil, he had the fastest car and he capitalized.
And won the race.
Max in Bahrain, Max made a mistake overtaking, mm-hmm. and he went off the track and Lewis was forced to give that position, and Lewis held his position. Mm-hmm. There you can point to times for both drivers, mistakes or really good runs of fortune. Hungary is another one where Bottas went bowling and took out both Red Bulls. Mm-hmm. So with all of that being said, 2021, we can finally put it to bed.
Thank
Max
God.
Max is the reigning world champion. The result is not going to change. And honestly, it doesn't matter how many people come at me and tell me I'm wrong, whatever. These are just the facts. This is the way that it is.
Yep.
We are in a position of being more journalistic than anything. And you have to be objective. And the objective fact is Max is the world champion.
Yep. So now, finally putting the 2021 season behind us, we're going to go on to, we're going to do this segment every weekend for every race. There are several segments that we're going to do every weekend, but a brand new segment that we haven't really done before. This next segment is called Our Biggest Winners and Losers of the Weekend. So we're going to start off, you always like to hear the bad news before the good news. So we're going to start off with the biggest losers of the weekend. I will start McLaren.
Yeah.
Sorry. I know that burns. I've never really been a McLaren fan, but like as someone who is very sympathetic towards McLaren and who loves McLaren, ouch, that really hurt.
And as a personal Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo fan, like those two individuals as drivers, I was heartbroken to see what happened.
Yeah, that was tough.
And being in the position as Ferrari fans that we were the past 2 years, like empathetically, my heart is aching for McLaren because we've been there.
We've been there for 2 years. So
I think it'll be an easier fix for them because they didn't get caught cheating.
Yeah.
Yikes. So I think they're going to be back to the front quicker than Ferrari had to be. It took Ferrari to, but man, yeah, it was rough.
Yeah.
I will say, I think they were, Ricardo and Norris, both of them started on the medium tires, which I think from the get-go compromised their race. And I think that's what put them behind the 8 ball a little bit. And so I think they came into that first stint compromised, and all power to them. Trying to do something different, maybe be a little bit off strategy, go long. Nobody knew what the tire deg was going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So good on them for trying to, gamble a little bit, but I think it went a little sour for them and they ended up at the back.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was a learning, especially with the tire situation. It was a learning process that unfortunately they had to go through. That maybe realizing where in the past, starting on the mediums when everyone else was on the soft looked to be an advantage. Now, maybe not so much. Granted, Bahrain was a lot different than how Spain was, because when they did the Spain winter testing, it was a lot cooler. So maybe when they get to Europe and the tracks are a little bit cooler, not as hot, maybe we'll see McLaren shine.
And less abrasive.
Yeah, less abrasive too. But unfortunately, this weekend was a learning experience, and I think McLaren had to learn the hardest. And my heart was breaking for them.
Yeah.
So that's my first biggest loser of the weekend.
One of my biggest losers are the Mercedes power unit employed cars. Now, I think it's truly, I think each problem. So the Mercedes powered cars are Mercedes. And this does not apply to the actual Mercedes Works team. They finished 3rd and 4th. They were always going to be on for points that entire race. Fine. But the other Mercedes power cars, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Williams, all of them, aside from the DNFs, in on-track finishing order, the bottom 6 drivers were all Mercedes powered drivers. All Mercedes powered cars.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely convinced that it's just the Mercedes power unit. I think there's a lot of shuffling around in the power unit pecking order because of the new E10 fuel, which people like, James Key and Andrew Green have kind of come out and said that this is, and Adrian Newey too, like this is the biggest power unit overhaul since the V6 turbo hybrid, because the E10 fuel burns at a different temperature. So they have to completely rework all of the combustion technology in their car. That's what Ferrari spent most of their time working on, and it paid off. But I'm not entirely convinced that that is the crux of all of their problems. I think for each team, there are different things impacting them. And I think it's going to take several races. Like I would even say maybe down all the way to Imola, before we really kind of get an understanding of where everybody's at and what actually the problems for all of those teams are. But it's not a great start for those Mercedes powered teams.
Yeah.
And I'll even say, Mercedes, I mean, we'll get to them in a little bit, but they were also off the pace too. So what I think it is that power unit is so, I mean, Toto Wolff and James Allison and everybody at Brackley and Brixworth for the Mercedes team, they've said that they had to do a completely fundamental rethink on their power unit setup and structure. And I think that is kind of like, so each team has to do a lot of different things when it comes to packaging that car. So I think it actually might be forcing a little bit more of an aerodynamic limitations than anything, just because those cars are all packaged so differently. And maybe that's just with the new regulation, the aero regulations that, the cars have this year. Maybe it just doesn't work to their advantage. I don't know. And I don't think we're going to know, but they didn't have a good showing this first weekend out.
Nope. Another biggest loser I have, and I think we both share this, Red Bull. Yikes, Red Bull. And I mean, the Red Bull powertrain cars, sure, but I'm talking specifically about the team Red Bull, which they, in the course of 3 laps, went from heroes to 0. And I feel, oh gosh, I feel so bad. And it was the same issue on both cars.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, yeah, they double retirement in the last 3 laps, man. That is just not what you want in the first race of the year. So they're definitely one of the bigger losers of the weekend.
Yeah, it's funny. If the race was 3 laps shorter, they would definitely be in the winners category. Because that car is quick.
Oh yeah, it's quick.
And honestly, I think over 1 lap, it's quicker than the Ferraris. I think over a race distance, and especially over long runs, I think Ferrari is the quickest, just because the way that they use their tires. But that Red Bull is quick, man.
It is.
And yeah, exactly. Like I like what you said. In 3 laps, they went from hero to 0. And so I think they have a lot of homework to do on the powertrain side. And it doesn't help that, Pierre Gasly's car also caught on fire.
Yeah. I think, granted, I don't know too much about, you're more the tech guy, but it seems that the issues that both Max and Checo had are not issues that are terribly difficult to fix.
No, so it was
more the tech. So I know it was a fuel pump issue.
It was a fuel pump issue. I actually don't know. I think they are under the impression that it is not a fundamental flaw. I think Christian Horner said that it wasn't like a fundamental thing. It's just, maybe something wasn't fastened right. That, fuel was leaving the fuel tank. So he seems to be under the impression that it's less of a fundamental fix, which is good news if you're a Red Bull fan, or if you're like me and you have Red Bull as your fantasy constructor for the next 4 weekends. Yeah, I didn't do well in fantasy, mainly because of Red Bull. But yeah, I have to throw Red Bull in there. It's really unfortunate, but I think it should be hopefully a quick fix. I'm also going to throw Pierre Gasly in the losers category, and it's to no fault of his own.
Yeah,
because he was having a great weekend. He was in the points all race. He was set, and had he finished, AlphaTauri would have had a double points finish because Yuki Tsunoda also finished in the points. So, it's unfortunate that happened. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Those are all the losers that I have. I can't really think of anything else.
Those are the ones that I have. So we'll go on to the biggest winners. Obviously the biggest winner, the team that finished 1-2 and had a driver on pole, Ferrari. I think they're the biggest winners of the weekend.
Yep.
And there's really not much to say about. They had a flawless race.
Yeah. And I have a feeling that like a lot of our biggest winners we're going to talk about in our next segment. So we can just go through these. Yeah. So you said Ferrari. I'm going to say Yuki Tsunoda, because on a weekend where, he had a very up and down and inconsistent season last year. And in a race where Pierre Gasly didn't finish, he picked up good points for the team.
Yeah.
So I think Yuki did everything that he needed to do there. I think he was saying in the post race press conference that, there's still things that they need to learn about the car. And they still have some work to do. But he started out on the gate strong and consistent. And I think he had a little bit more of a complete weekend.
Yeah. Another big winner, obviously the whole talk of the town, talk of the paddock, Haas.
Specifically K-Mag.
Specifically K-Mag. Even though Mick didn't finish in the points, it was his highest finishing place.
Yep.
And Kevin Magnussen, for real, with his first weekend back in a Formula One car, finishing 5th place in Haas. I mean, Gunter said it best. What a Viking comeback. For Kevin Magnussen. I mean,
I think there are a few more F-bombs in there. than we care to share.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on
definitely more F-bombs.
on that Haas thing, I'm convinced that Mick Schumacher would have finished in the points had his race not been compromised with his contact with Esteban Ocon.
Oh yeah, I think so too.
Another winner, Alpine, double points finish.
Yeah, in testing, they looked like they were going to be pretty rough this season, but Alpine, finished in the both drivers finished in the points, so definitely good on that.
I'm gonna swallow my pride here and say Mercedes. And again, we're gonna touch on them next.
Yeah,
but they capitalized where they needed to.
Yeah, and I will say I've been extremely I'm a very critical person of a lot of things, but I've always been very critical of Lewis, but the way seeing him on the podium and truly thanking his team for all the hard work, it because they've been struggling this season, it felt, not that it didn't feel genuine before, because it definitely was genuine before, but it just felt, I was happy. I was happy for Lewis. I was and to see him on the podium smiling and celebrating with Carlos and Charles, I almost thought I said Charlos and Carls again.
Oh my gosh.
With Carlos and Charles, and I was very, very happy to see Lewis able to capitalize on that success. And yeah, you're absolutely right. For Mercedes, after the horrible winter testing that they've had, well, horrible by their standards.
Yes. Which is still pretty good.
Yeah, which is still not bad. Yeah, it was. I would say they were winners, and George was right behind them in fourth place.
Yeah,
which that was well, no, that's a lie. I was about to say that's George's highest finishing, but he does have a podium from last year in Belgium.
Yep. I think the last thing that I'm going to put in our winners bracket before we move on is race officiating, and I'm putting it there because we didn't have any controversy, we didn't notice it, and we didn't have to talk about it.
Yep, we didn't have to talk about race officiating. So and as a result, everyone won. Everyone won. Like the fans,
yes.
We were, as a result of that, we were the winners.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are going to go ahead and move on now. Sorry, go ahead.
In relation to race officiating in the winners club, I'm going to put Crofty and Martin Brundle, because race officiating was so controversial last year. It has been clarified several times. The race directors, the new race directors have clarified a lot of things. And what I appreciated, anytime something came up, like I know Lewis Hamilton got a track limits warning. There was the 5-second penalty that Ocon got. And then throughout the whole safety car period, they did a great job of explaining what was going on, what should happen, and the way that things should happen, the expectation of the way that stuff is supposed to play out. And then it happened that way. Yeah. Like, it was great. And with the track limits warning, they said, usually you get 2 track limit warnings, and then you get the black and white flag, and then you start getting penalties. So it's like a 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing. And, like all of these things. And then, with the whole, safety car situation and the lap cars and it coming in, they talked through everything, and then it happened that way. So I think both of those together, big dub in my book.
Yep.
So let's move on.
We have 2 more segments to go. We'll make these relatively quick. The next one, we have this week's top 10. This is the official Formula One Bros top 10 ranking of the week. Now, not top 10 driver, not specifically top 10 driver, not specifically top 10 team, just top 10. Any category, anything is fair game. We've got drivers, we've got teams, we've got all sorts of stuff in here. So we'll just run it we'll go start at number 10, and then we'll go back and forth 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So in 10th place, we have, drum roll, Nico Hülkenberg. He didn't finish in the points, but on such a quick notice, being able to jump back into a Formula One car that is drastically different than anything that he's been familiar with in the past. Jumped right in and ran a pretty solid race for Aston Martin. So in 10th place, we have Nico Hülkenberg.
Yeah, great comeback for Nico. Very, very happy to see. And I think the team was happy to see him there too.
Yeah.
In ninth place, we have Alpine. And like I said before, it was a solid weekend. The only, they got a solid double points finish. They were good. They were reliable. I didn't think that both cars were going to make it to the end. They did. They both finished in the points. The only thing that keeps me from going higher is the little squabble that Esteban Ocon and Mick Schumacher had in the opening lap.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think all in all, it was a really solid showing from Alpine. I think they have a lot left in them. And I think there's a lot left for them to gain throughout the season. But a really good showing from Alpine, and they needed that double points on the start of the season.
L plan is so far still in motion.
Yes.
So in 8th place, and this is a little bit tough. 8th place, we have Alfa Romeo, the Alfa Romeo team. Mm-hmm. They having both drivers in the points for a team that struggled to get into the points in the past, having both drivers, especially, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, but Zhou Guanyu finishing in 10th place, having both drivers in the points, they had an awesome weekend. They had an awesome week. And especially after the testing that they had, is that what you were going to say?
No, I was going to say, especially after the start that Valtteri Bottas had.
Oh, that too.
He was able to claw all of that back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alfa Romeo, they showed that they were going to be quick in winter testing, but they had a host of reliability issues and didn't know how that was going to work out for them, but they ran a great race.
Just real quick to contextualize Alfa Romeo Sauber's position when they were still Sauber at the beginning of the new regulations in 2017, the team was essentially bankrupt. And they had so many issues in that car that they literally could not solve until new regulations came around. No matter how much they did, how much investment they had in their wind tunnel, bringing back Fred Vasseur, all of these different people, this restructuring that they've done, more injection of cash flow, anything, nothing was going to help until they got regulation change, and they've capitalized.
Yep.
So moving on into 7th place, we have race officiating.
Yeah, and we've kind of already touched on it.
We already touched on it, and it's just nice. Granted, it's a long season. It's only been the first race, but it was the first test of all of the decisions that the FIA has made over the winter. Moving Michael Massey aside to a different position in the FIA, restructuring the race director position, so it's now 2 people. There's a virtual assistant. Herbie Blatch is kind of like an assistant to the race director, so he's an intermediary, taking away the team communications to the race director. All of these things, it seemed like it paid off because we didn't notice it. And I think that is the biggest win that could have happened for that race.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't notice it. Yep. In P6, in 6th place, we have Zhou Guanyu. And there's not really a whole lot to be said about that because, he just had what a debut he had. First race in a team that everyone suspected that wasn't going to be good and historically has not been good. Comes out first race in Formula One and got points. Everyone was kind of like thinking, is he going to be a pay driver, kind of pay driver situation, pointing their fingers at him saying pay driver. He got in the points, and he's definitely even in one weekend, he's kind of started to prove those doubters wrong.
And you could tell just how much it means to him too, because there's moment, the moment that him and his trainer shared after the race where he just broke down crying. So it means a lot to him. And he was talking to Rosanna Tennant and Oscar Piastri in the post-race show, and obviously giving the nod to Oscar Piastri because everybody had Oscar tabbed for that seat over Zhou Guanyu. And a lot of people said that he got it because of his money. But he himself said that he felt he had proved that he belongs. And I think we can say without a doubt that he does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to the 5th, Mercedes.
Yeah.
Lewis Hamilton drove the wheels off of that thing. George Russell was right behind. And they capitalized. And this goes back to what I said earlier. Good drivers and good teams capitalize on tricky situations. And they did.
And picking up points where they can.
Yeah.
And if you can consistently pick up points when you can, and you'll be in the hunt for at the end of the season.
Yep. I don't have them any higher. I don't think we have them any higher because of their overall pace on the weekend, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, solid showing for Mercedes. I was impressed with where they finished.
Yep. In 4th place, and obviously this would have been a lot higher had he not retire. Max Verstappen in 4th place. He drove a great race. I mean, Charles was quicker, but he drove a great race. And had he not retired, I think he would have been either for 2nd or 3rd. He would have been higher. But yeah, he had an awesome race.
Yeah, and
was able to keep. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the racing that he did was clean and mature.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, great job on Max. In
3rd, we have, in general, the Haas F1 team.
Yep.
They were the legends. They were of the paddock. They were the talk of the town. I said this about K-Mag, but I'm going to say it about Haas. They truly came back stronger than a 90s trend. Like I'm so impressed with everything. They all, and watching videos of them celebrating after the race, you can tell how much it meant to them and how much it meant to Kevin, how much it meant to Gunter, how much it meant to everybody. They would have been higher had Mick finished in the points, I think, in our ranking. But there's so much more to come for that team, and I'm so excited to see how they progress over the season.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, in 2nd place, we have Kevin Magnussen. I mean, not much to be said. He 100% had probably the weekend of all weekends for any F1 driver. First race back, was late to testing, the Bahrain testing, because of, everything that happened with Mazepin, and freaking finished 5th place in a car that last year was the worst on the grid. So hats off to Kevin.
Yep. He did everything that he needed to do and everything that was expected of him. Finally, in 1st place, Ferrari. They had a flawless weekend, nearly flawless. It was interesting. Carlos came over the line in P2, and he said that was probably his worst weekend for Ferrari. And I think you could tell a little bit, at the midpoint of the race, where it was at the race was at its, kind of just most drawn out part in the middle of it there after a lot of green flag running. He was well behind Charles, and he was not on Charles's pace all the time. But he did everything he needed to do. He capitalized on a poor restart from Max Verstappen. He got up into P2. They qualified really well. They did everything that they needed to do. They came out in a 1-2. And they, I think, are well on their way to restoring the hope of the Tifosi. So yeah, I mean, they had a near flawless weekend.
Yeah. So our last segment that we're going to get to, each of us have come up with one hot take from the Bahrain. So hot takes from the Bahrain Grand Prix. Each of us have one. Chris, do the honors. Start us off. What is your hot take for the weekend?
I've been singing Mercedes praises this episode, so I'm gonna
keep them humble.
I'm gonna keep. Yeah, I'm gonna go in a different direction here. Obviously Mercedes, they did well. They did what they needed to do. But I saw a lot of people on social media, a lot of social media chatter about, oh, Mercedes were sandbagging, they're great, they got a podium, they got third and fourth, they're back, they never left, da 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 da. And it's easy to think that when you look at just results, but at the midpoint of the race, Lewis Hamilton was a half a minute behind Charles. That's over a second a lap slower than the drivers in front of them. On average, their 1 lap pace is a half a second down on Ferrari and Red Bull, and they are 0.8 to a full second slower on a long run than their rivals. Their tire degradation is way more extreme. Granted, I hesitate on harping on tire degradation at Bahrain because of the track's abrasive surface. But when you can't get the hard tires to last more than 15, 20 laps, something's wrong.
Yeah.
That car. So my hot take is Mercedes are not sandbagging. They truly are in trouble, and they got lucky. And it reminds me of what happened to Ferrari at the Austrian Grand Prix, the first race of the 2020 season after the COVID shutdown. Sebastian Vettel didn't make it to Q3. Charles did, but he qualified 10th. And it was only because of the penalty that Hamilton received for whacking Albon. And literally half the field retiring, he was able to get second place and on the podium. And Charles was very honest in that post-race interview and saying, yeah, cool, we did it. That was a fluke. That's not going to happen again at all. And it didn't. The closest they got was a 4th place in Bahrain that season. So that reminds me a lot of that situation. They got a podium because they got lucky. Now, on that luck, Lewis and George put that car in a place where they could capitalize on the misfortune of Red Bull. But it took the misfortune of Red Bull. Their pace was not where it needed to be. At one point, they were both behind Kevin Magnussen in a Haas and Valtteri Bottas in an Alfa Romeo. They didn't qualify nearly where they needed to be. George started 9th. Lewis started 5th. They weren't sandbagging. That is their honest pace, and they're a half a minute. They're a half a second to a second slower. They were a half a minute at half race distance behind the leaders. So that is just, and that's not me hating on Mercedes. I looked at the timing sheets, I looked at the data, I looked at the stats, and I'm just being objective. That's just the reality of the situation. And I think they know that, and they're willing to work hard, which is great. They're willing to work hard, but they're not where they need to be.
Nope,
and
not
so
at all.
I think there's a little bit of false hope around social media surrounding them right now.
Yes. So my hot take, kind of going in the opposite direction, not just Ferrari, but the Ferrari powered cars. So Ferrari, Haas, Alfa Romeo, that whole Ferrari power unit, my hot take, and granted, this is after just seeing one race and testing, but that Ferrari power unit is the best on the grid. It is the best on the grid. I know a lot of people are going to say, but Red Bull, they had 3 of their 4 cars retire. None of the Ferrari cars retired. And all but one Ferrari powered car finished in the points. And that one that didn't was 11th place. Ferrari's power unit is the best on the grid. And I know they've done a lot of research in the new E10 fuel, getting everything. And you know what? They did it. They did it. All but one. So 5 out of the 6 Ferrari powered cars finished in the points. I can't even remember the last time that happened. Both Alfa Romeos, a Haas, and both Ferraris finishing in the points. I genuinely cannot remember the last time that has happened.
Honestly, since Haas joined the grid in 2016, I don't think it has.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think Ferrari's power unit is the strongest on the grid.
Yep.
Above Red Bull, above Renault, above Mercedes. So that's my hot take.
Yep. So just to wrap up the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, to put a bow on it and look forward to 6 days time racing in Saudi Arabia. What are you looking forward to next weekend?
Well, I'm looking for it. Saudi Arabia is a very power sensitive track. So the cars, I think this is a track where we will truly be able to see a better picture of how the power units stack up against each other. Not necessarily the cars, but the power units. Because there's a lot more that goes into cars performance rather than just the power unit, but we'll truly be able to see how the power units stack up against each other because it is such a power sensitive track. And I think we're going to see, again, a lot of good racing. I'm hoping that they've made some changes to the track.
I believe they have.
Just it looked really dangerous last year. And while that's exciting, dangerous is not always a good thing. So I'm hoping to see some really good, clean racing again. And I'm excited to see where all the power units stack up against each other.
Yeah, I think it's also going to be a really good test it's going to be another good test for the regulations because it's really on that track. It's hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be put to the test. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to, again, the race officiating being put to the test because I think last year, in my mind, at least, and this is completely anecdotally, anecdotal evidence, and it's just my opinion, but in my eyes, that race was a little soured for me because of how messy the officiating was and how confusing. I just the whole race, I was just confused. I was like, what is happening? Why are you making the decisions that you're making? I was just confused. So I think that soiled that race in my eyes. And I think that race was, because it was new, was also very polarizing. So I'm looking forward to just a good old straightforward race at a new street circuit. Something that is probably going to be a lot, thrilling in the guise of, very similar to Baku in Azerbaijan. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to all of that being put to the test and maybe it being a little bit more straightforward of a race in Saudi Arabia. I think that it tainted my opinion of that race because of that officiating. It's a brilliant track, but I'm looking forward to just a fresh restart.
Yep.
On that.
So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this week's episode. As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify, all socials, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all at Formula One Bros. Please go give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Yeah. And again, thank you to everybody who already has, everybody who is listening, everybody who has subscribed, everybody that's viewed our videos. It helps us out a lot. And
share with your friends.
Yep. Be sure to share it. And we will be looking forward to getting back with you all in 6 days time for another Formula One race.
Yep. Awesome. Bye, everyone.